You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 238 of Common Descent. This episode, our topic is osteoderms, aka skin bones.
Yes, good stuff.
This is a really fun one. Osteoderms are a topic that has come up a lot on the podcast, and this is a part of animal anatomy that you and I are both extremely familiar with.
Yes.
Because we've both worked on animals that have osteoderms. But it is a fairly obscure piece of anatomy.
Yeah, but it's one of those that needs to be defined every time it's said.
Yes, this is something where I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of our listeners are only familiar with this concept because they've heard us talk about it.
Yep.
So in this episode, we will talk about what osteoderms are, what we're discussing, what the morphology, the anatomy of these bones is, how they form in the skin, and who has them, right? This is the bony armor of things like alligators and a bunch of lizards and armored dinosaurs. And we'll go through the long list of not only modern, but ancient organisms that have osteoderms, and the even longer list of potential functions of what these osteoderms are actually doing to the benefit of these animals.
Yeah, surprisingly versatile for just being bits of bone in the skin.
This was a really fun episode to prepare for because I knew that it was going to be mostly just you and me geeking out about our favorite examples of this thing.
Yeah.
So please enjoy that. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. My hope is that this becomes one of those episodes that people comment and say, man, when I saw the title, I wasn't sure I was going to enjoy it, but then I really learned a lot and liked this discussion. So if it's one of those, let us know. And if it's not, don't let us know that.
Yeah, no, we're good.
This episode topic also was requested, as all of our topics are, by our listeners. This one comes to us thanks to Lydia, Fen, Apollo, and Jonathan.
Great request.
Before we get into the meat, or in this case, the bones within the meat, a few announcements. First and foremost, as always, we have a Patreon. Everything we do with the podcast is supported by the lovely folks over on our Patreon. In exchange for their incredible support, there's all sorts of goodies on there, bonus content, director's notes. We do monthly live streams. There's merch you can get. And at certain levels, new patrons get their names shouted out on the podcast. This episode, we would like to welcome our newest patrons, Claudette, Jake, and Piero.
Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for your support.
Dear listener, if you would like to lend your financial and emotional support to our science communication efforts, you can find the link to our Patreon in the episode description. Hey, there's a few exciting things coming up in Common Descent land. One, by the time this episode comes out, 4 out of 5 episodes of Poke-E will have been released. This is our spooky spin-off series where we are speculatively evolving Pokemon. We've done 4, and then there's one more the first weekend in March for people to enjoy, and then that'll be the end of that.
Yes, it's been tons of fun. I'm loving seeing people's responses, so absolutely stop into the Discord and make your opinions on it heard.
After that, coming up not long afterwards is going to be Silver Screen Science, so stay tuned for more information about that. Also, by the time this episode is coming out, the first episode of Bricks with Basque for the year will be available.
Yes, yes.
Where Will is over on YouTube building Common Descent themed Lego builds. And exciting new news on the Bricks with Basque front is that all of the Bricks with Basque episodes are now available ad-free on Patreon.
Yeah, so you'll find all of those there in a collection that you can watch through at your leisure.
Yes, and then in the future, they'll be coming up posted on Patreon. So like the main episodes of the podcast, if you're watching them for free, you will get ads, which help us keep the lights on and the things running. And if you are supporting us on Patreon, one of the lovely benefits you will get is you won't have to hear commercials. Also, at the beginning of March, shortly after this episode comes out, Will and I will be making an appearance at ETS UConn in Johnson City, Tennessee. Someone previously reported that we weren't going to be there, and that person was full of it, didn't know what they were talking about. We will, in fact, be there.
Lies and slander.
Lies and slander. Our lawyers will be in touch. We will be making a single panel appearance on Sunday, March 8th. So if you are in the Johnson City area, come check us out and say hi. We'll be talking about speculative evolution and fun stuff like that. And we will be doing our first museum meetup of the year in April. April 18th, both of us, will be meeting up at the McClung Museum in Knoxville, Tennessee. Last year's museum meetups were a ton of fun. We go to a museum, whatever of our fans are around and want to come hang out with us, come hang out with us. We walk around the museum, and when we're lucky, we get to hang out with some of the cool people affiliated with that museum to tell us about their cool science stuff. And let me tell you, we're real lucky when it comes to the McClung Museum and the University of Tennessee.
Yes.
So this one's going to be a ton of fun. We'll be posting those details all over. So if you are relatively close to Knoxville or can get relatively close to Knoxville for April 18th, come say hi. We'll be meeting at the museum at 11. Look for more information on our Discord and on our website and stuff. There's other exciting things in the works that are coming up, but I'm tired of talking, so I'm going to turn it over to Will to get us started with the news. Every episode, before we get into the main topic, we like to talk about some recent research that has been published on topics of our proficiency and enjoyment: paleontology, evolution, and Earth history. Will, what news? You talk for a bit.
I have news about the earliest reptile skin we have evidence of now with this new finding. This is research by Lorenzo Marchetti et al. In Current Biology, and the article is a press release from phys.org. You can find those in the blog post. This is a skin impression from an ancient stem reptile, so ancestral reptile, that was found in Germany and is approximately 298 to 299 million years old.
Right at the beginning of the Permian.
Mm-hmm.
Almost as old as you could possibly get reptile remains.
Yes, this is when we start to see reptiles become more abundant, is in the Permian. They show up in the Carboniferous and then do quite well in the Permian. But as is the case with fossils, we don't know a lot about the soft bits because those don't fossilize. And while we can get fossilized skin, we've talked about that with dinosaurs and stuff, it's very rare. And this far back, it's even more rare. So we don't have many specimens with mineralized skin. And when we do, it's usually not preserved very well and hard to tell who it belongs to for sure. This was a skin impression that is exceptionally well preserved. Very, very good condition. It was also discovered in association with some resting traces and footprints.
Oh, cool. All right.
And it sounds like the indication from the evidence they have is that these are likely all from the same animal. So
sure,
we have a lot of traces from potentially, likely one individual and at least the same species. This trace includes scale impressions that range from diamond to hexagonal and laterally pointed forms, which I don't know exactly what that refers to, but different shapes of scale from the skin of the animal, and that it is very similar in the pattern and shape to later members of reptilia. So this looks like very traditional reptile skin, very much what we would expect, but considering it's such an early member, notable that it was already very reptile-y. The resting trace is also a new ichnotaxon, a new trace fossil species, which is fun. This makes it the oldest complete body impression of a Paleozoic stem reptile. So like the oldest bit of reptile skin evidence we have.
Yeah.
The footprints were a known trace that they a type of trace fossil that they'd known of before that has proportions similar to Bolosaurians, which is a group of early reptile members, stem to modern lizards, so on that side of reptilia. So it's likely that this skin impression is from a member of that group.
Sure, something kind of lizard-like.
Yes, exactly. All of this is very cool. even in addition to all of that, there's one more cool bit, which is an area of the impression that would be the front part of the tail has a
Mm.
slit-like structure in the scales that seems quite similar in shape and anatomy to a cloaca.
A reptile butt.
Yeah! An even older reptile butt.
And even we talked a few years ago about the famous Psittacosaurus, the dinosaur that had
Mhm.
the first preserved cloaca of a dinosaur. This is an even older butt.
Yep. And in comparison to that, they noted that it is different in shape. It does not look similar to the dinosaur cloacas that we know of or crocodilians. It is much more similar to turtle, lizard, or snake in its anatomy and shape.
Interesting. Man, what a time. What a time that we're
Right?
learning about ancient cloacas.
They also noted that one of the reasons it's such an important question of reptile scales is that the emergence of reptile scales was a new kind of scale compared to like fish scales. That this was a new adaptation for living on land, being epidermal scales outside, the outer layer of the skin versus dermal, deeper down scales, which are what you'd see in
Yes.
fish and earliest tetrapods.
Which will come up later in the episode.
Yeah. There's evidence that the earliest amniotes, the earliest egg layers, had both epidermal and dermal scales. This one seems to just have epidermal scales like we see in reptiles. So it does
Sure.
seem like there is a differentiation that happened into reptilia of the scale type they had.
So much of paleontology is focused on major shifts in bones and teeth and body shape. It's so cool when we get to look at evidence of major shifts in scale patterns, the kind of
Yeah.
thing that, like, artistically we just put scales on ancient things.
Mhm.
Right, like if an artist were to draw the earliest reptiles, they would put scales on them. But those scales, those patterns have to be based on what we understand from maybe other extinct things or modern animals. It's very, very cool to get a piece of not just the evolutionary history of this group, but the physical appearance.
Yeah.
It's like if you ran your fingers over this animal, these are the scales you would feel.
Yeah. Well, and as we often mention during newses, none of these findings are shocking. The early member of the reptile lineage has reptile-like scales. It's on the side of the lineage that's closer to lizards, and the scales look very similar to lizards. Its
Mhm.
cloaca looks more similar to lizards, and it looks like it had the kind of scales that lizards have. Like, nothing shocking, but we did not know that for sure
Yes.
until we got this, and so that's very cool.
Listeners, be mindful of where you sit because 300 million years from now, some scientist might get a look at your butt.
It's gonna get fashion archaeology of the denim and the pant impressions of people's butt impressions.
Well, as it happens, I also have brought along a news about ancient skin impressions, and this one is shocking.
Ooh.
This is a dinosaur that seems to have had a type of body covering we haven't seen before. This is research published in Nature Ecology and Evolution by Jiandong Huang et al., and we will link in the blog post to an article on Sci News by Enrico De Lazaro. This study describes a new species of dinosaur, an iguanodontian, so related to iguanodon. These are generally medium to large sized herbivorous dinosaurs. These fall into the big overarching category of, quote, duck-billed dinosaurs. This one is named Haolong. It comes from the early Cretaceous of China around 125 million years ago, the Yixian Formation, which is famous for lots of early Cretaceous dinosaurs and other animals. This iguanodontian is known from a single, nearly complete skeleton that is also articulated, so it is mostly in the shape of the skeleton. The bones haven't been scrambled up very much. It is a juvenile, not fully grown, and about 2.5 meters long. So about 8
Okay.
feet long, which is a nice medium-sized iguanodontian youngin.
Mm-hmm.
A new species of Chinese iguanodontian is by itself pretty exciting because this was a group of major herbivores at this time. So any new information about the diversity of this group helps us to fill out our understanding of ecosystems. But the headline maker is that this iguanodontian is preserved with fossilized skin. Parts of the skin are preserved alongside the skeleton. This is not the first example of this in this sort of duck-billed dinosaur lineage. We've got preserved skin from a bunch of hadrosaurs, like Edmontosaurus, very famously. We've got those mummies with all the desiccated skin on them. But early iguanodontians, we have very little. There's only a handful of examples of like little skin patches from this group of dinosaurs that preserve various scale patterns similar to the one that you were just describing. How Long preserves a bunch of skin, which shows different scale patterns on different parts of the body, large overlapping scales on the tail, and round bumpy scales along the neck and the torso, which are different from other known iguanodontian scale patterns. So we're getting some diversity of scale types. And among the scales are little spikes.
Ooh.
That are being called, depending on, who's talking about it and what you're reading, I've seen referred to as spikes, spines, quills, just little spiky bits.
Huh.
These are preserved exceptionally well. CT and histological analysis is able to look at the tissue layers and even the cellular structures in these little spines. They are hollow and cylindrical and hardened. I believe they're keratinized, so kind of like hair or feathers. They've got that keratin structure. They are notably a different structure than proto-feathers that have been found in other dinosaurs, and a different structure from the kind of scaly spines we see in lizards today. So they are something different. Just these little, I didn't see an actual measurement, but just from the images it looks like they're like a few inches long. These little spines, if you think of like the spines on an iguana or something, like that come off the head, kind of looks like that, but just like along the body in and around those scales. But apparently not feathers and apparently not scaly spines, seemingly a distinctive dinosaur spine type.
Fascinating.
Yeah, which suggests that it is, if that is correct, a different origin of an integumentary structure.
Wow. Which, not too shocking. Dinosaurs were crazy diverse. So, like, absolutely, that makes sense that you can, like, we see examples like pangolin scales are just the penguin, like that's something they came up with. That's not like a mammal feature. That is a unique way to do that kind of thing. It's both very cool, once again, to get an idea of what one of these ancient creatures looked like, but also I am so happy that the boring iguanodon got a bunch of spikes, because like iguanodons are typically portrayed as just like, like we've talked about, hadrosaurs just being kind of like the cattle of the dinosaur world. I think iguanodons are even more so get treated that way very often because they don't even have the head crests and stuff. It's like you're like goats, you're neat, but people don't usually put you in nature documentaries.
Yeah, like a deer.
Yeah.
You're just around.
So it's fun to be like, no, this one was spiky. This one had spiky skin.
There is some discussion among the authors about what the function of these spines seems to have been. Based on just the shape and distribution of them, their top suggestion is that these were potentially defensive.
Yeah.
That like a porcupine quills, that it was just kind of covered in spikes that would make it harder to bite. This is something we see a bunch in modern lizards. There are tons of lizards that are just spiky, and it just makes them harder to hold and harder to bite and less appetizing. They do point out that there's also the possibility that these helped with thermoregulation, right? They might have been insulating or radiating heat they could have been sensory, like
Mm-hmm.
fur or whiskers often are. But they think that probably the main function of these, their hypothesis, is a defensive function similar to, porcupine quills and stuff.
Yeah.
They also point out that this is a juvenile. This specimen is not fully grown. And now we don't have any other specimens to go on. This species is currently known from this one skeleton.
Yeah.
But it would be really interesting to know, were these spines different in adults?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I could see them getting smaller in adults if they were to protect against predators. And once you get full size, you might not need that protection. But I could also see them getting bigger in adults if they're using them for display or they're part of like combat between the same species. So that could go either way.
Right? That's exactly what I was thinking, is depending on what your function here is or what your main function is throughout life, both make sense. And that's very cool, because if we find an adult and it's mundane looking, we'll need to keep this in mind, because that would be an easy chance for us to go, well, this one's not spiky at all. It must be something different.
And then, as always with dinosaur stuff, it brings up the question, how many spiky dinosaurs were there?
Yep. Yeah.
And this is interesting because hadrosaur, the ornithopod lineage, is one of the major lineages of dinosaurs that we don't have a lot of feathers or integument for. So were they spiky? Edmontosaurus doesn't seem to be spiky. We've got lots of mummies that show us just the scales and stuff. How widespread was the spikiness? Are these at all related to feathers? Or is it just that dinosaurs liked being fuzzy and they came up with a dozen ways to do it? Absolutely fascinating. The number of unanswered questions is just great.
Absolutely. And paleoartists, consider this the common descent seal of approval to put spikes on as many dinosaurs as you want.
Quill those dinosaurs.
Quill them up.
We are on board. I remember, I think I brought this up at one point. I was chatting with I wrote a thing online somewhere where someone had asked about like how widespread were feathers, and I made a comment about like, feathers seem to there's a lot of feathers among dinosaurs. And someone responded and was like, so you want to just put feathers on all the dinosaurs, like sauropods and stuff? And my response was, well, first of all, that's not what I said. But also, absolutely, I'm on board for feathery sauropods.
Why not?
Yes, paleo artists, feather your sauropods. I would love to see that.
Looks so cool. I've seen models, like miniature models of feathery sauropods, and it's very satisfying.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of ornithopods, I have news about one that got bit in the face.
Oof. Should have had quills.
Yeah, would have helped. This is an Edmontosaurus skull with a tyrannosaur tooth stuck in its snout.
That's one of the worst places to have a tyrannosaur tooth.
I avoid them getting there as often as possible.
Unless you are a tyrannosaur, in which case having tyrannosaur teeth in your snout that's where they belong.
As long as they're in the right part. If they're in the bottom of my snout, that's great. If they're in the top of the snout like this, that's also not good.
There is a surprising amount of nuance to this discussion.
This is research by Taya Weinberg-Hensler and John Scannella in PeerJ. The article is by Laura Bisas in Popular Science. This specimen comes from the Hell Creek Formation, which we've discussed.
Episode 127.
This is a semi-complete articulated Edmontosaurus skull, an adult skull. So mostly together and in position as it would have been when it was in the body. It was from the Museum of the Rockies in Montana, and they noted embedded in the nasal bone, so the bone that leads up to the nose and nostrils, there is bite marks there and a tip of a tooth embedded into that bone. They note that finding bite marks is relatively common. Finding an embedded tooth is extremely rare. So, very exciting.
This isn't the first case. I don't think it's not even the first case for Edmontosaurus.
Probably not.
But it's not a very common find.
Well, and the thing that makes it so nice is when we find bite marks, those can be useful. They tell us about predation happened of some sort, whether it was hunting or scavenging, something fed on this animal, and we can sometimes match up, the tooth grooves and get most likely candidates. A embedded tooth can be identified very often to the biter, because
Mhm.
especially theropod teeth are actually quite identifiable if you have a small enough selection and you know who the bitee was. So we know this species interacted with that species in a bitey kind of way. To figure out who the tooth belonged to, they compared it to the teeth of other theropods known from the Hell Creek Formation. They looked at the tooth crown, because it's the tip of the tooth, and the denticle measurements, the serration measurements on the tooth, and identified that it very confidently seems to fit a medium to large bodied tyrannosaurid.
All right. Which in the Hell Creek Formation means probably T Rex. Although I
Yep.
guess Nanotyrannus is now an option.
Yep. Now in the running.
Nanotyrannus is on the board.
They said the curvature and ovoid cross section of the tooth lended that identification, and further suggests that the tooth is a maxillary tooth, which is the main bone of the upper jaw,
Mhm.
and from about the middle to back portion of that bone. So a little
Cool.
bit further back in the mouth. They also did CT scans of the skull to try to figure out the orientation of the embedded tooth. So, like, how was this bitten into the face?
Right. What direction did this come in from?
Yes. They said that the position suggests a bite from the front of the snout. So face to face, with the Tyrannosaur biting toward the Edmontosaurus's face.
Sure. As opposed to like coming in from the side or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or like coming from on top or something. It
Mhm.
seemed like they were face to face when this bite happened.
Once again, not the way you want to be with a Tyrannosaur.
That's if I'm gonna get bitten, seeing it coming, it's got to be the worst, worst way for it to happen. They also note that the lack of reactive bone suggests that no healing happened from this bite. So it suggests that this animal either died from this bite or was dead when this bite happened. But given the position, they said it does seem that the most likely biting behavior, that it fits best with a predator trying to control a prey item, biting onto the face.
Yeah, it would be hard to get that position on a carcass,
Exactly.
right? Like straight on the face. But this is a thing. Well, I'm thinking of like lions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, big cats today, which will sometimes grab the face, which controls the prey, but also can start to suffocate them.
Yes, it's like this is a well-known hunting behavior in large predators today, hunting large prey items, which is what we would have had here. So all evidence seems to lean toward this was a hunting bite. Now, whether it's the bite that killed the dinosaur or if it died shortly after, but it does seem that this bite happened when the Amentosaurus was alive, and it did not survive for much longer after the bite happened.
Yeah.
They also note, I almost forgot this part, which would have been a shame because it's my favorite, is that the amount of force it would take to embed a tooth into the nasal bone and break it off suggests deadly force.
Yeah, that this wasn't like a love bite.
Yeah, well, and this wasn't like I'm lazily feeding. This was an aggressive, forceful bite, which would be a bite used on a living, struggling animal, not a dead, still animal.
Yeah. This is that big conundrum that we always get to with bite marks like this, where it's nearly impossible to tell if this bite
Yes.
mark happened on an almost dead animal or a freshly dead animal. This is a situation where, from what we can tell, the evidence does seem to support that this was an active hunting bite, which is very cool.
Very often when we get to these kinds of evidences for behavior, and evidence for behavior in general, really, we often can't get a definitive answer on for sure how this event played out and what the scenario was that it happened in. But we can get evidence, and then it becomes if we were to bet, if we were to place a bet on what the truth was, most scientists would bet this way. We might lose that bet. We might be wrong. But if I had to bet, that's the safest place to put my money. Is this seems like a attack bite.
Once again, paleo artists, common descent seal of approval to illustrate tyrannosaurs biting edmontosauruses in the face.
Yep. Oh, so cool.
Gotta get some quills. Yeah, put some quills on that snout
Yep.
to discourage
You need
the
to put those
tyrannosaurs.
further up.
Well, speaking of reptiles biting other reptiles in the face, I've got one last bit of news about snakes eating snakes.
Yep. Nope. Very fitting.
That is how you go about. Like, if you're a snake,
Yes.
that's the better way to do. You go face first. That's usually the preferred orientation of eating food, which was not the case. I had a dream last night after I read through this article that my snake ate another snake. That it got that another snake got in there and it ate it, and it ate it tail first, which is not the way to do it. My snake was also several times larger in my dream than it is in real life.
Though that is in character for Neo.
Yeah,
Neo's a bit of a fumbly snake.
He's got a hard time. He can't see very well. He can't tell head from tail very well. Anyway, this is research published in the journal Biological Reviews by Bruna Falcao, Vinicius Salpedro, and Omar Entiauspe Neto. We will put a link in the blog post to an article in Smithsonian Magazine by Joshua Rapp Learn. Snakes sometimes eat their own species. This is cannibalism. We talked about cannibalism in episode 188. It is a much more common behavior than you might at first think. In snakes, it's also a behavior that isn't very well understood because while it has been reported, reports are pretty scattered. There's never been like a comprehensive, here's all of the data we have in one place before. This study is a comprehensive, here's all of the data we have in one place. It is the first major review of reported snake cannibalism. Now, hearkening back to episode 188, cannibalism specifically means an animal eating a member of its own species. There are tons of snakes that prey upon other snakes. This study is specifically looking at species cannibalism within snakes. They collected just over 500 reported examples of cannibalism from the literature, the earliest of which was from 1892. So this goes back quite a ways. And basically, they were looking for patterns. Are there any interesting patterns or trends that we see that can help us to understand this behavior? The first pattern is that these reports were very widespread. They encompassed more than 200 different species across 15 different snake families, most of the major diversity of snakes, and across more than 50 countries. It is a rare behavior, but it is not a limited behavior. It is very widespread, both geographically and taxonomically.
Cool.
They noted that if we consider cannibalism to be an evolved feature, then the phylogenetic analysis would suggest that it evolved at least 11 different times across the snake family tree. But there is some discussion in the Smithsonian article that it might not be an evolved feat. It's not like a trait necessarily that evolved, so much as just like a behavior that happens sometimes.
Yes.
And they note that the vast majority of these reports identify these cases as most likely opportunistic, which is to say, not planned. This wasn't something that the eater was specialized for. This happened. Right, there was another snake nearby. I needed to eat something, and I ate it. That seems to be, these were sort of incidental cases most of the time.
Which is notable because, as we talked about in the cannibalism episode, there are animals that regularly cannibalize, mating cannibalism and things like that.
Yes. So then they went looking for patterns that line up with, are there trends in when this opportunistic behavior happens? They noted that about half of the reported species are snakes with a generalized diet. So not a specialist diet, right? They're not eating just one type of food. They eat a variety, which does make sense for animals that might occasionally eat their own species. A small percentage of the reported species are snake-eating snakes.
Interesting.
Now, that might simply be because there's just not that many snake-eating snakes to begin with.
Yes. Okay, that's fair.
So, like, I think they said like 3% of the reported examples were snake-eating snakes, but there's the number of snakes that are dedicated snake eaters is pretty small to begin with. But this one also makes sense if you are specialized. Like, if you're a snake that specializes in eating birds, it might make sense that you don't cannibalize very often. But if you have a specialty, snakes is probably the one that makes you best suited for occasionally eating other members of your own species.
Which I was expecting that to be a much like higher amount, but I hadn't considered that is a fairly rare behavior, like specialization.
Yeah. Well, and also cannibalism is fairly rare. So it might be that snake-eating snakes aren't any particularly more likely to end up in that situation.
Yeah.
The authors note that in some cases, these examples of cannibalism have been suggested to be linked to lacking of food resources. This is something that has been reported previously for some species of snakes. It's been reported in other animals that cannibalism sometimes can happen when there's just not enough food around. They note that the majority of the cases in this compilation are vipers and colubrids, the two major families of snakes, which are also two of the biggest families of snakes. So it's not surprising that they make up a big number of the cases. Both of those previous reports have suggested that they might turn to cannibalism if they're lacking in food. Also, the authors note that both of those are families that are rarely snake eaters.
Yes.
It is very uncommon for colubrid and viperid snakes to be snake eaters, which does support that idea that this is an opportunistic behavior. This isn't something specialized. Compared with elapids, which is another major group of snakes, which are pretty regularly snake eaters. Even the ones that aren't specialists, there's a lot of snake-eating snakes there. They weren't particularly overrepresented in this case. They were the third most common, but they're also a very large family of snakes.
Yeah. Interesting.
They noted some specific trends. For one, the cases of cannibalism, in these cases, predator and prey body size were positively correlated, meaning larger eaters are eating larger prey.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is interesting because, like, my guess would have been, oh yeah, a big thing comes across a small thing and it goes, sure, this is easy to eat and I'll eat it. But they're eating big prey, relatively large snakes when this happens, which they point out is consistent with dietary behaviors that are deliberate. That, like, you're choosing a bigger meal for that high yield, which supports the idea that, yeah, if this is opportunistic, you want to get the most out of because you have to eat something, but does also suggest it isn't wholly random.
Yeah.
That it's not like I'm just going to eat whatever's nearby. It's, okay, I don't have enough food. What's the biggest thing nearby that I can eat, even if it's my own species?
Yeah, that it's not necessarily a case of, oops, you crossed my path while I was hungry, so I took a bite, but I am struggling to find the prey I want, so I'm going to go hunting for the next best thing, which is potentially one of my own species.
Yeah. The authors note that the only major group of snakes that didn't appear in any of these reports are blind snakes, which are the group of snakes that have a very limited jaw motion.
Yep.
These cannot open their mouths super wide. They eat little larvae and stuff. So that is probably just a mechanical limitation for them.
Yeah, boy, if I could.
Oh, I'd eat you. And some specifics, particularly because you already mentioned one of these, there are some occasional reports of sibling cannibalism, of eating their, like, fellow nestlings, which has been reported for other species. Several cases in this report of maternal cannibalism. So a parent eating either unviable or weaker offspring, and sexual cannibalism, that, like, the mates get together and then, in this case, the female eats the other one. Both of those in this case were mostly reported for boids. In fact, I think if I
Oh,
remember right, there were only 2 cases in all of these of like a male and female came together during mating season and the male got eaten, both of which were anacondas.
interesting. It does make sense. Like mating cannibalism is very fitting for snakes because females are bigger typically, and it
Yes.
also makes sense for boids where the females can be way bigger.
Yes.
Like a female anaconda can quite literally dwarf the male like
Yep.
massively.
And I'm a little surprised that there's only a couple of cases of it
Yeah.
because you'd think this would be a really easy thing to go for. Is like,
Hmm.
yeah, I haven't eaten in a while and it's mating season, which means a bunch of tasty things are coming to me specifically.
Well, yeah, and now I'm about to have to make some eggs and
Hmm.
embryos. So, like, you know, another way you could help that happen, male that just fertilize these eggs, get into my belly.
I'll take all of the rest of your tissue as well.
Yeah. So, like, it would be very fitting if it were a regular thing. Interesting that it's not.
And the last very fun example, they noted among these cases 2 cases of combat dance cannibalism.
Whoa.
That this is a thing that a bunch of snake species will do where they get together, often it's males, get together and have a little combat dance, right?
Hmm.
For mating rights or whatever. And they do that like they rear up and they twine around each other. 2 cases among these of I guess the winner
Yeah.
eating the other one. And this one, they did note both of those cases were cobras,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
are, and in this case, specific species that are snake eaters.
Yes.
I think one of them was king cobra.
Yeah.
Like which is the snake I would expect to be good at cannibalism because they
Yes.
are already specialized for eating other snakes.
Well, that's why I was saying, like, I thought the snake specialist would be like, oh yeah, no, I don't target my species, but if I get an opportunity, I have the equipment and it works. So I was expecting it to be like predominantly found among them. This though also makes sense because they also have that very ritualized,
Hmm.
wrestling and everything. I wonder if like if we look into it more, is this common or was it a I won and I'm really hungry?
And that seems to be the general takeaway from this review is that there doesn't really seem to be a major trend
Yeah.
outside of this kind of just happens occasionally. There
Yep.
don't seem to be any snakes here that pop out as particularly prone to cannibalism. It
Fascinating.
really does seem to be like things are not going well because as we discussed in episode 188, biologically speaking, cannibalism is not generally a great idea.
No.
Right. There's a lot of costs to eating other members of the same species, both to yourself and to the general population. So it being a last resort kind of behavior makes sense. This study does seem to support that this isn't a specialist behavior in snakes. It does happen and it seems to happen just kind of when you need to.
Cool.
They also do note that most of these reports were captive snakes,
That also makes sense.
snakes in captivity, which makes sense because that's where it's easiest to observe snakes.
Hmm.
By like that, it makes total sense that that would be the case. It does also, and they didn't mention in the paper if there was any distinct different trend between the wild cases and the captive cases. The captive cases, in fact, it is easier in captive snakes to report if they are, for example, not eating enough
Yep.
otherwise. And I think that's where a lot of those previous reports have come from. Is like, yeah, this snake in captivity wasn't getting enough food and then it ate this other snake. So there is a bunch of data you can get more detailed from captivity, but it does also mean that a bunch of these might not be reflecting typical wild
Yes.
behavior. So that would
Because
be something that, and they mentioned in the paper that like hopefully we can expand this data set moving forward and get even more wild cases.
yeah, and it's also captivity raises the opportunities that like if you're a
Mhm.
wild snake and you get real hungry, you may or may not come across another snake of your species to eat. That's a roll of the dice. If you live with that other individual, when you get hungry, they will be there. It's the same reason we
Yes.
see a higher amount of like hybridization in human care populations, to where it's like, well, yeah, typically they would not mate. They can, but in this case, when the chance arose, they were right next to each other because they live in the same habitat.
Yes, they were in the barn, and this
Yes.
animal was like, it's mating time, and there's one other animal here.
Exactly. In the wild, you would typically have more opportunities to roam and seek a mate. So same here, maybe they would not cannibalize as often because they would more likely come across a wider variety of secondary prey.
Yeah. So if they could get an expanded data set with enough to then compare, like if you could get 500 captive and 500 wild cases and then look for, are there differences in the trends? That would be a really interesting expansion on this.
Neat.
So snakes are eating snakes out there, sometimes the ones that maybe they shouldn't be eating. This has been an extremely reptile heavy news section, which is fitting because it's going to be a very reptile heavy episode discussion. Not just reptiles though. Stay tuned. There's a whole lot to get into. We're going to take a short break, and then when we get back, we will get into the discussion of what are osteoderms, how do we identify them, why are they there, starting with the detailed description of bones in the skin. The word osteoderm is built of osteo, as in osteology, for bone, and derm like dermis or pachyderm, meaning skin. Osteoderms are bones in the skin.
Mm-hmm.
We have talked about these a bunch on the podcast because they are really significant body parts of a lot of different animals. Typically, when we talk about osteoderms and we don't want to use the technical word osteoderm, we'll say armor.
Yes.
Bony armor that grows in the skin. Will, when I say osteoderms, what types of animals come to mind? I know what the first one is.
Crocodilians!
Yeah, crocodilians have these. That's the armor that is just underneath the surface across most of the body, right? The whole back and tail of the body.
And some of them have it on like their belly and like limbs. Like they can be very, very covered in these.
Yeah. Another very recognizable extreme example would be ankylosaurs, armored dinosaurs. All those knobs and spikes and plates are bony armor that grows within the skin.
Yes.
Typically, those are the kinds of shapes we're talking, right? We call it armor because it often is plates and knobs like you might expect in a suit of armor.
Yes. Very much like chainmail-esque, where it is a covering made out of many pieces.
Yes, absolutely. Osteoderms are distinct from a lot of other bones based on where they form, right? They don't just sit in the skin, they form in the skin. That is where the bone develops. This sets them apart from the skeleton. Like our skeleton is internal underneath the skin. Osteoderms are sometimes grouped with some other bones as referred to as extraskeletal bones.
Yes.
They are outside of the skeleton proper.
And that means they aren't also like, very often when we talk about specialized bones, they're specialized off of some known bone. Like this is a specialized finger bone or rib. These are not one of those skeletal sets.
Yeah, they are separate bits of bone that develop in between the layers of the skin. They develop within the dermis, one of the deep layer of the skin. Now, we'll go into a lot more detail about their anatomy and who has them and how they're used. But first, as I love starting an episode discussion with a little bit of definition, or in most cases, lack of definition. Exactly what counts as an osteoderm is vague. This is one of those cases where you know it when you see it, and then there's a bunch of blurry edges. Osteoderms are not the only extraskeletal bones that form within the skin. There are certain skull bones that do that. The baculum, episode 53, is an extraskeletal bone. Different ones of these form differently. So they don't all always form in the same part of the skin or the same sort of tissue. Osteoderms aren't alone in sort of sitting beyond the primary skeleton. There are also some animals that have similar structures that aren't quite osteoderms. Apparently, Sicilians have mineralized scales within their skin that
Interesting.
aren't the same structure as osteoderms. They're just a different thing.
Sicilians,
Right? Episode 162. Go listen to the whole list.
just have to be so weird and different, don't you?
There's at least one type of gecko that has osteoderms that are pure collagen and not bone.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
soft osteoderms, kind of.
Yeah.
There are also cases where you can get dermal bones like this where they don't belong.
Mhm.
This can happen, for example, in humans. You can get what's called ectopic bone, where you get mineralization within the skin. In humans, that's pathological, right? That's
Yes.
a symptom of an issue. I think dogs can also get that. So there's this sort of spectrum of other things sort of around the fringes of osteoderms. Probably the most direct comparison with true osteoderms are fish scales. Fish, this is all over the place. This is a regular feature of fish. They develop bony scales in the skin. These are probably the ancestral feature that gave rise to osteoderms. But they tend to be different because of the components in them. Fish dermal scales tend to have, for example, tissues like dentine, right? They have tooth-like tissues. They've got different cell types in them that make them kind of their own thing, although they are very close. That is to say, osteoderms proper is really a tetrapod feature.
Yeah.
This is really a other vertebrate, ancestrally land-dwelling vertebrates. This is a feature that happened after fish.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it with these kinds of structures, it's interesting how often we get down to these two things are very much effectively the same, but they're being built differently, so they are technically different. They are not actually the same structure because the cell that's making them or what they're being made out of are different categories.
Or their genetic underpinnings, like where and when they develop embryologically. They're just a different part of the body plan.
Yeah. Which really makes it means that when we're like flippant about people being like it's not technically champagne, we do that a lot in biology.
Absolutely. It's not an osteoderm unless it formed in the osteoderm region. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to be talking about mostly the things that are obviously osteoderms, leaving out a bunch of the edge cases because there's enough to talk about with pure, everybody agrees, osteoderms. Now, one of the reasons why it's difficult to define succinctly where are the boundaries between what is and isn't an osteoderm is because osteoderms are preposterously diverse.
Oh, yeah.
This is not a feature of a single group of animals. This has evolved in many different groups of life. They come in so many different shapes, abundance on the body, distribution on the body. Some of them are fully inside the skin. Other ones emerge from the skin. Some of them are fused to the bones underneath, the proper skeletal bones. Others are separate. They also come in a variety of sizes. They range from truly microscopic, like micrometer sized, to the plates on the back of a stegosaurus, which can be like a meter long. So there's tons of diversity, and they come in a variety of different, not just shapes, but fundamental structure. To give us an introduction to this diversity, I want to highlight what I consider the 3 modern groups that are the champions of osteoderms. And they're champions for different reasons, which I think is very fun.
Yeah.
In terms of just pure, diverse, ancient consistency, if there's a group of animals around today that are arguably the best at osteoderms, it's crocodilians.
Oh, yeah.
Alligators, crocodiles, gharials, caimans, not only do they have lots of osteoderms, they all have osteoderms. It is a defining feature of the group. They've got them across the back, the tail, like you said before, sometimes the legs, sometimes the belly.
Yep.
And they sit just underneath scales, right? There are scales that grow on top of them as an outer sheath.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you touch their back, you're touching skin, but it's a very thin layer of skin before you are touching those bony osteoderms.
Yes. Will, describe an alligator osteoderm for us. Croc osteoderms tend to be pretty consistent. Like they look pretty similar across the different groups.
Absolutely. Like there's different arrangements. Like the osteoderms on the back of the neck are one of the ways you actually can identify species. The numbering of like how many rows, how many are in each row is one of the identifiers. But yeah, structurally they're pretty similar. And the vast majority across the back tend to be pretty square shaped, you know, maybe kind of hexagonal or, you know, more sides, but usually pretty geometric. And they fit together with those flat sides, making a kind of grid pattern.
Yep.
And then they have a smooth underside, and the top part is very pitted and comes to that little point that gives them that very bumpy backed texture.
Yeah, this is another thing that will continue to come up in this discussion. Osteoderms tend to look very different between different groups. Like once you've seen a croc osteoderm, you're not going to mistake it for anything else.
Yes.
They look very distinctive. They've got those grooves and pits on the top.
The rugosity.
That provides space for like vasculature, right? Blood vessels and stuff to go through them. And also surfaces for like scales to adhere on the top of. They are very distinctive.
One of my favorite features that you notice once you look at them is the front of them is sloped down a little bit and the back underside is sloped up a little bit, so that they shingle together and create this unbroken surface on their back. And it's once you notice that and you have like a handful of osteoderms, and you immediately start putting them together like a jigsaw puzzle because it's so satisfying.
And then they also have like smaller, like pebbly osteoderms. If I remember right, like on the neck, on the legs, things like that.
You'll get smaller ones around the edges, and the tail also like can get different shapes as you get like the taller scoots on the tail that make those spines. Some of those have osteoderms that are more taller and more notable. So yeah, you get a variety, but the majority are those big flat ones on the back.
Yup. The second group of modern animals that I consider one of the champion groups of osteoderms, in this case, for I guess recognizability, for like pure perfected form, are armadillos.
Absolutely.
Armadillos are arguably, if crocs are the best at osteoderms, armadillos have refined it.
Yes. Yep.
Armadillo, they are also the only major group of modern mammals with osteoderms. They're not the only ones. More on that later. But they are the armored mammals of today. In armadillos, they also have a whole bunch of these connecting, articulating plates. Armadillos, they tend to be hexagonal. They tend to be six-sided. They also are more slab-shaped.
Yes.
They're not quite, they have like grooves and stuff in them, but they're a bit more like a cracker.
Yeah.
Like a graham cracker. In armadillos, the osteoderms are so joined that they form a shell. In fact, it is called a carapace. Like scientifically, it's called a carapace, which is a word that we typically use for turtles, beetles, and tanks.
Yeah.
Armadillos have osteoderms across the head, fully covering the torso. Most of them have them down along the tail. They form distinctive shields along the body. We talked about this a bunch in episode 153, which was our armadillos episode. So for more details, you can go check that out. But in our, when a crocodilian rots away, right? If an alligator dies and rots away, the osteoderms tend to fall apart.
Yes, they are separate because it's a very flexible, like they are not a hard shelled back at all.
Armadillos tend to preserve a shell, like a turtle.
Yeah, like when you if an armadillo dies and rolls over on its back, when you find that skeleton, it is within the bowls of these shells.
Yes. Armadillo osteoderms also have grooves and gaps throughout them, again, for blood vessels, nerves. They also have various glands, like they have sweat glands that protrude into them, and in many cases, hair follicles.
Yeah, they're fuzzy.
They're fuzzy. And in some cases, some of our armadillo's hair is between the osteoderms, but there are others that either go up through the osteoderm or originate within the osteoderm. So it is worked into that, like the osteoderm is just part of the skin holding on to all these things.
Yeah, it makes a very interesting, like, composite structure.
Armadillos also often have scales on top. They have this keratin layer on top of their osteoderm, similar to crocodiles.
Yeah, so when you touch them, they still feel hard as bone because that keratin is like your fingernails. It's very tough, but you're not actually touching the osteoderms.
Yes. And then the third group that are our modern champions of osteoderms, in this case, for sheer creativity, are lizards.
Yeah.
Lizards have by far the most variety of osteoderms. Crocs and armadillos are generally quite samey in the way that their osteoderms are. Lizards are preposterous. About 25% of modern lizard species have osteoderms. So about a quarter of living lizards are armored. In some groups, it is a typical feature, right? Skinks tend to be armored. Anguids, including like glass lizards, tend to be armored. Cordylids, which are the girdled lizards, are famously armored. And then in other groups, occasionally there's osteoderms. Geckos, there are a handful of examples. There is, as far as it seems we know now, one chameleon species that has osteoderms. Yep. And then in some groups, it's highly variable. There has been a couple studies recently on monitor lizards that have found that it is so inconsistent in monitor lizards where some of them have a bunch, some of them don't have any. It varies not only within the genus, but within species.
Wow.
And even like ontogenetically between adults and young. Where you just get changes. None of them are like armored, but they do have various bits of osteoderm throughout parts of the body.
It's like things, being variable within a species are like humans are hairier or less hairy and like wear hair. But it's weird to think about that with something as solid and robust as a skin bone. Yeah, that's weird.
In some lizards, like monitor lizards, the osteoderms are just kind of scattered throughout, right? They're kind of pebbly, peppered here and there. In others, they're a continuous plate of armor, like we were discussing with crocs. Sometimes they sit right up next to each other. A lot of times they are overlapping, like shingles, like you were describing for crocodilians. Some lizards have them only in certain parts. So like armored geckos, the osteoderms tend to be on the head. They're on the head, they're maybe on the back, whereas a lot of skinks are full armor. I think there are many species of skinks where it's basically everywhere there's skin. There is osteoderms within it. They are highly armored.
That's insane.
Some lizards have very simple osteoderms, just a fairly simple structure. Others, like skinks, for example, skinks have compound osteoderms. So each osteoderm is formed from the fusion of smaller osteodermites.
Whoa.
So like our skulls are formed from multiple bones that fuse. Skink osteoderms are like that.
Wow.
And then they also come in a whole bunch of different shapes. You have some that are square, you have round ones, some of them are flat, some of them are round like pebbles. Some of them are vermiform. So they just look like they look like little hard noodles.
Weird.
Like
Just like those
uncooked
little
macaroni.
crunchies that they'll add to salads and stuff.
Yeah, or when you make ramen and like little bits chip
Yeah.
off. Like those. Yeah, it's just like little hard bones inside the skin.
Just squiggles.
Yes. So lizards, it's all over the place. They
Wow.
are, in fact, a lot of research into osteoderms. When from what I've read, it seems like if you want to study, like, let's get a really good idea of what an osteoderm is like, you go to crocs and armadillos. And if you want to study the evolution of osteoderms, you go to lizards.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, like lizards, it's also a species identifier, I know, for a lot of
Yes.
groups,
it
which is something that is not true for the others as much.
Yeah, you can get certainly different groups. Like you could tell a skink osteoderm from a beaded lizard. This will come up later, but that's at the Gray Fossil site.
Yeah.
We have 3 different families of lizards represented among the fossils, and they were identified based on osteoderms.
Which is
Because
so cool.
an anguid lizard osteoderm, like a glass lizard, is this square shape. It's got like a flat front, and then it's got ornamentation along the back, and there's a ridge down the middle, and that's what glass lizard osteoderms look like. And then beaded lizards, it's a pebble with little like pits and grooves in it.
Yeah.
So they are diagnostic to what group of lizards you're looking at.
Well, and it's lizard osteoderms stand out to me in regards to like armadillos. You can't ignore that they're armored because for many of them, you can't see anything but armor when they are hiding from you. Like
Yes. That really does set armadillos apart, is that they are the most visibly armored. Because even crocs, it's like those are scales.
Yeah, most people don't realize there's bone under it.
Yes.
But as soon as you explain that each of those bumps is a bone, it's like, okay, that makes sense. And that's why they are so robust. Lizards, the first time I learned about lizard osteoderms were the ones that are like fused to the skull of Gila monsters and beaded lizards and stuff like that. I didn't realize that was so spread, and that there were many that were spread throughout the body until later. And I think it's because when you look at like a skink, they don't look particularly that much more armored a lot of the time than any other than just a random knoll or something. Like they have bigger scale, so they look tougher, but I would not suspect there's bone waiting for me underneath if I tried to bite it.
Yeah. Well, and lizard osteoderms tend to also be small. They're relatively small, they're relatively thin, and there's just a million of them.
Yeah, like if you rendered a skeleton of one of these lizards, it's very likely you could lose most of the osteoderms if you're not careful.
Yes.
While if you render a skeleton of a croc, you're going to have a whole bunch of bony pieces laying around.
Yes. Yeah, when I was a grad student, I did a bunch of research on lizard fossils. And in the collections, the osteological collections at the university, we had a bunch of modern lizard skeletons that had been prepared and de-squished so that it was just the skeletons left. And like and there were tons of it, right? You open a little box and it's like, oh, a snake skeleton and a frog skeleton and whatever. But there were these it's just a little plastic box with a skink in it. And you open it up and it's bits of the skink skeleton, right? You've got the skull, you've got the limbs, you've got the spine sitting on a carpet of osteoderms.
Just a dragon's horde.
Just a dragon's horde of these tiny little, like someone spilled a bunch of rice on the bottom of this box. There's so many of them.
Fingernail clippings.
Yeah, there's just hundreds of them. There's so much of them.
So cool.
Now, those are not the only living groups of animals that have osteoderms. There are no birds with osteoderms, but there are amphibians. There are a number of frogs that have osteoderms. Horned frogs, marsupial frogs often have plate or knob-like osteoderms along the head and the back. There are some tree frogs, at least, that have osteoderms on the limbs. like on
Ooh.
the legs.
Cool.
And there's turtles. Now, turtles are an interesting case. There are, some turtles have osteoderms in the legs, right, along the skin of the legs. Tortoises have that. Snapping turtles have them in the tail, those like bumps and spikes in the tail. But then there's the turtle shell, which, as we've talked about before, episode 60, the turtle shell is predominantly its rib cage. Right,
Yes.
especially the carapace. The top part of the shell is the rib cage, modified into a shell shape. There is dermal bone that contributes to the shell. So the final form of the shell is a combination of skin bone that has fused together with the bits of the skeleton, or the ribs and stuff. Sometimes these are discussed as osteoderms. Other times they're not. There are bony scutes and there's keratin scales atop the backs of turtles, but they've also just kind of become part of the shell structure. All of that is to say, I'm mostly just going to ignore turtles.
Well, it's one of those where the turtle shell is such a specialized thing that is this a bones or osteoderms? It's a turtle shell.
Yes. Well, and it's not even with an armadillo where it's a bunch of individual pieces that have come together to make this chainmail shell. In turtles, it's a very solid fused structure.
Yeah.
So it's not osteoderms in the same way that we're talking about with a lot of these other things. Also, we did a turtles episode 60. Go listen to that. I've decided to mostly ignore turtles as they relate to this topic.
You're just too weird, turtles.
Turtles are too weird. I'm so sorry. I got a lot of lizards to talk about. Now, one of the things that should be clear from so far this discussion is that osteoderms are highly convergent. This is a feature that has evolved many, many, many times, independently in different groups, right? Crocs evolved it seemingly way back at their ancestry, since this is an almost universal feature of their extended family line.
Absolutely.
Armadillos, this showed up ancestrally. They all have it, but they are almost unique among mammals. They are an independent origin of this. It has been estimated that osteoderms have originated more than a dozen times among lizards. Sometimes there are multiple suspected origins within skinks and multiple origins within geckos. It's just happened 1,000 times.
Well, I mean, it's while they're deleting limbs, they're adding skin bones.
Yeah, lizards are playing real fast and loose with skeletons. One of the recent studies that has been looking at monitor lizards and found all that variation estimated that there seem to have been multiple origins and losses within the genus Varanus. within the genus.
What? Is this just like, it's like when you're playing a video game, it's like when you play Spore and you're like, I'm evolving this time, but this time I breed, I'm going to delete my legs and I'm going to bring them back next time because I wanted to try out like you can't do that.
I love lizards came up in this regard when we were talking about episode 221, legless lizards and limb loss. They came up in episode 154 about live birth. Lizards are just doing whatever they want. They're just kind of back and forth.
They are so variable, and they seem to adapt and develop features surprisingly quick. Well, just last episode we talked about the wall lizards that seem to be restructuring their mating system because one new morph showed up and is spreading all over. Lizards play fast and loose, and they do not mess around.
I think that was bonus news, actually.
Oh, that was bonus news.
So
right.
Go to the Patreon, everybody.
Yes, if you want to learn about that, it's there.
So osteoderms are estimated to have evolved independently at least 20 different times in just reptiles. Plus, you've got others in mammals and amphibians. But research into the structure and development of osteoderms has found that they, even across different groups, tend to be very similar.
Yeah.
For example, comparisons between armadillo osteoderms and, alligators and lizards has found that though they showed up independently, how they develop during embryologic development, what genes are used and expressed in their formation are very similar, which suggests that even if osteoderms themselves are not universal among tetrapods, the underlying mechanics of developing osteoderms seems to be something that goes way, way back, and indeed probably goes back to those fish scales.
Yep.
That is just a trait of our bodies as tetrapods that we can, with relatively little provocation, start growing bone in the skin. Well, I mentioned before, we can do it. Like it happens in humans sometimes, accidentally, right? It's a disease, an illness when it happens in us, but it can still happen.
Yeah, which is always such an interesting aspect of genetics and evolution that can sometimes look especially mysterious when you don't realize that you can have these underlying systems that just aren't being utilized or active in many, many groups. But, like we said, with other groups that seem to evolve a feature over and over and over, it's like there's probably something genetically that predisposes that group to being able to do that. And you can have it for animals, effective, for all tetrapods.
Yeah.
We seem to have ready to go the upgrade of skin bones.
Now, that being said, when we look at different groups of animals, there are some that do this way more, right? Reptiles are most of the armored, and the reptiles are really good at this. Not only our modern groups, but a bunch of dinosaurs had osteoderms. I saw one paper that actually made the really interesting. I love observations like this, that reptiles, in their integument, right? We're talking, skin, because skin has all these layers and all these features within it. Reptiles tend to do fancy stuff with the dermis of the skin, and mammals tend to do stuff with the epidermis, which is where you get like porcupine quills and pangolin scales, some of the components of like horns and stuff, that for whatever reason, when mammals want to get fancy with their integument, they tend to do it in the higher layers of the skin. And reptiles do a lot more of it in the deeper layers of the skin, which is pretty interesting.
That's a very interesting quirk.
Love it. I have no more insights into that. It's just a fascinating pattern.
It feels like one of those just like little tidbits that you hear in like people giving advice on like writing and world building, to where it's like, just this society is centered around lumber. Just work that into the world building, and it's got that feeling.
Well, it reminds me of when we used to talk about the swimming, right? When mammals swim, they swim up and down, and everybody else swims side to side. And you learn that and you go, whoa.
Yep.
Like a mysterious pattern of the universe has revealed itself to me. Yeah, mammals do stuff with the outer skin.
Yeah, as soon as you said it, it makes so much sense, but I'd never connected that pattern. Cool.
Now, we will spend most of the second half of this episode talking about functions of osteoderms, but I want to start with the obvious one. We use interchangeably the word armor because by far the most obvious function of osteoderms is as defense against attack, right? Against predators and stuff. Especially since the most obvious osteodermed animals that we've been talking about are armadillos. And that's what their osteoderms are doing, is giving them a shell like a turtle.
Yeah, it is a defensive structure. The way they behave when threatened emphasizes this defensive structure, going to the extreme of the three-banded rolling up into a bowling ball of armor.
There has been a ton of research into the physical mechanics of osteoderms to look at how good a job they do at this. We've already mentioned the relationship to chainmail multiple times. That is that's not just us being clever with a comparison. That comparison is made in scientific literature. That this is an armor made of individual components that connect or overlap, which makes it strong and flexible.
Yep.
That's what chainmail is for. Right? It's multiple pieces that can move relative to each other while still forming a continuous plate of armor.
Absolutely.
In some species, the osteoderms will also be anchored to, like, have extra tendons and stuff attached to them to anchor them to the underlying tissues. There have been a number of biomechanical studies that have looked at, like, all right, here's an osteoderm structure. What happens when we subject it to an impact or pressure? And many osteoderms do very successfully dissipate those forces.
Yes.
They are good at absorbing that external force. Some osteoderm, like skinks, have been noted for this, that their osteoderm armor tends to be particularly good at preventing, like, piercing and holding. We talked about that in episode 197 when we talked about durophagy. There is some potential evidence of a correlation with lizards like skinks having more armor when they live alongside venomous snakes.
Interesting.
That is if you're gonna avoid the piercing of anything, that's the number one pierce that you want to not get pierced by.
Yeah.
So they do tend to have that sort of specialized defense. In turtles, a lot of tortoises and land turtles will have osteoderms on the legs, sometimes on the neck or the tail, and they're positioned so that when the turtle retreats into its shell, those osteoderms are basically plugging up the gap.
Yes.
So that's outward facing. So it is fully armored. Even if you try to poke at the legs, there's bony armor in there.
Yep. It just finishes up, make it a contiguous surface of armor.
Yes. I think we probably mentioned this in the armadillos episode, but there are multiple reports of people getting hit by bullets ricocheting off of armadillos. This is a thing. This has happened multiple times, that someone tries to shoot an armadillo and the bullet bounces off and hits the person. Like that. These in a lot of these cases, these are very obvious and very effective defensive structures.
Well, and it's one of those categories where not only is this very much the function for many of them, but even if there are other functions, or maybe even possible other primary functions than armor, regardless, if you put bone in your skin, you have made it more robust.
Yes.
Like, it is going to act as armor, just like having fur is not necessarily going to, like, the fur on a polar bear's primary purpose is not armor, but it does protect their skin from abrasion. It does protect the skin from damages, just like having a hair on the top of your head versus if you've shaved your head or have a bald head, your head is now more sensitive because it's lost that layer. So these are going to be defensive even if they have other things they're doing.
Yes. Now, with a feature that is so variable and so abundant, as you might expect, the list of potential functions of osteoderms goes on forever.
Yep.
We will talk about that here in just a bit. In the second half of the episode, what I'm going to do is take us loosely through geologic time, mostly as an excuse to separate out different groups and topics while we talk about more of the diversity of form and function of osteoderms. And we'll also get into some fun evolutionary trends.
Yeah.
But before we take that break, a quick note on osteoderms as tools of paleontology.
Yeah.
Osteoderms, as you might expect, make great fossils. Osteoderms make great fossils the same reason that teeth do, because there's lots of them and they are sturdy. They are sturdy. The fossil record of crocodilians is mostly teeth and osteoderms.
Yep.
That's what you get.
Absolutely.
The tough parts.
You're gonna find these scattered around. So even if they might not tell you exactly what species, you will be able to go, there were crocs here.
Yes. And the other thing is, as we've talked about in other episodes a bunch, when animals die and make the path toward fossilization, they tend to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so individual osteoderms are some of the more common fossil remains. This is true for crocs. It's true for lizards. Again, at the Gray Fossil Site, that's how these lizards were identified. In fact, as of this recording, beaded lizards are still only known from the Gray Fossil Site by osteoderms, as far as I know. This is true of dinosaurs. It's even true of armadillos. The armadillo fossil record is a lot of individual isolated osteoderms.
Oh yeah, like when we did our mammalogy course in grad school, there were a bunch of times where it's and here's this fossil armadillo, and it was just a big old osteoderm, and that's what we would be taking a look at.
So vertebrate paleontologists tend to be very familiar with osteoderms, especially if you're studying reptiles, because they are commonly found. They are useful for identification. We said that with lizards, you can often identify the family. With crocs and armadillos, you can at least say this was a croc or an armadillo. With dinosaurs, they're sometimes distinct from different groups of dinosaurs. There are even cases where, like ankylosaurs, the armored dinosaurs, the osteoderms look different for the different families of ankylosaurs.
That makes sense.
Off the top of my head, I don't know how reliably you can just automatically say what family it is, but they do have different morphologies in the different major groups. So they could be useful for identification. And as we will get into here in a little bit, there are some potential ecological interpretations that paleontologists can make from osteoderms, because animals in different habitats sometimes show different features of their osteoderms. All that and more after the break. We're going to start at the beginning of tetrapods and make our way through a little bit of sort of a chronological journey and look at just more diversity and variation of these fascinating little bony bits. As I said earlier, the progenitors of true osteoderms are likely the bony scales of fish that then gave rise to tetrapods, vertebrates on land. If that is where we draw the line and say osteoderms are a thing that land vertebrates have, then the earliest osteoderms are known from some of the very earliest tetrapods. As we discussed in episode 212, there are a bunch of temnospondals, early amphibians, that have osteoderms. There are also some other groups, I think lepospondals, some of them have osteoderms. In these early land vertebrates, those osteoderms have been suggested to have been perhaps an important part of their transition onto land. Which brings us to our first alternate functions of osteoderms. It's thought that those early tetrapods benefited from the osteoderms because, for one reason, they defended against the environment. Right? That if you're going to be dragging yourself along the ground, that's going to be scraping up the body. There are lizards today that some have belly osteoderms, which are thought to help protect them while they're scraping their bellies across the ground. This has also been pointed out for caimans. That they have belly osteoderms, that I've seen it suggested that it might be to help them defend against like river rocks. While they're swimming around the bottom of rivers. So these early osteoderms may have been physical defense against the environment. It's also been suggested that they might have been to strengthen the body. Now that you're going up to walk around on land, not only does it, it gives a little bit of extra support for that body, but as anchor to hold the position of the body. That these are now extra bones alongside the vertebral column that you can attach muscles and tendons and stuff to basically brace the body as you are walking around on land now, no longer supported by the water.
One analogy I saw for it within crocodilians that this has also been noted with is that it kind of acts like a suspension bridge of cables of tendons and musculature connecting these osteoderms and adding a arc of support along the back and body.
Yes. And in crocs, it's suggested that it is potentially helping them with swimming motions,
Yep.
in addition to potential walking around. That it's an extra pillar of support for the body.
Yeah. Well, it's like wearing a, like back brace and stuff.
Yep.
To where like this is not, attached to your skeleton, but it is extra support along your body to help you maintain your posture and da 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 da.
Yes. There are also other examples of osteoderms seeming to provide like a physical support structure. One example that I saw is there's been research into skinks that has found that the osteoderms on the skull seem to help reduce the strain of biting.
Oh.
That they're providing extra bracing for the skull, which allows them to bite a little harder without damaging the tissues of the skull.
Directly reinforcing the bone.
Mm-hmm. So
Cool.
osteoderms are bracers. Also, for these earliest vertebrates crawling up on land, osteoderms may have been helpful for water retention. You don't have to worry about drying out when you live in the ocean, but when you get on land, the air, the heat is sapping water from you. There has been other research on skinks that has found that armored skinks that have that sort of full coat of osteoderms, their skin tends to be half as hydrated as unarmored lizards. That those osteoderms are preventing water from either leaving the body or entering the body. The skin, those bones in the skin help form a barrier, like a moisture barrier that prevents the loss of water.
That makes sense, but I don't think I would have ever considered that was an effective enough seal. Like that. It's like saying to a mesh screen would stop water. Like it feels like there's too many gaps, but interesting.
Well, it reminds me of when we would make field jackets for fossils. At the Gray Fossil Site, the sediment is damp. It's moist because of the groundwater there. And you want to keep the moisture in because if it leaves, the clay dries up and the fossils can crumble. And the moisture barrier that they use there is just a plastic bag. It's a trash bag that they wrap around it. And that's all it takes. It's just not porous, and so it keeps the water in.
Cool.
There's also been some research that has suggested a potential link. This is another one of those maybe in girdled lizards, which are chordilids, which are my favorite example of armor. They're so cool. Where species living in drier habitats, there seems to be a correlation with more armor. That this might be another, there may be something going on here where you have higher armor in drier environments specifically for this water retention reason. It's also an interesting note because, and this is something we're going to get into a lot with this idea of not only multiple functions of osteoderms, but competing functions. For early amphibians, having bony armor in the skin, for all of the benefits it might have had, would have limited the amount of respiration they could do through the skin. That's something, you look at this, a lot of these things are also true of scales, right? Reptiles generally don't breathe through their skin because they've covered the skin in scales and they've thickened the skin and they've changed that part of their biology. Whereas frogs and salamanders are still doing it. They are still they're still using cutaneous respiration, absorbing gases and stuff through the skin. As we move into the late Paleozoic, and especially the early Mesozoic, we start to see a lot more osteoderm diversity. First, in like early members of the reptile lineage, like the parasaurs and stuff, you get these scutes and bony bits of armor. But then when we get into the Triassic and reptiles take off proper, we get tons of osteoderm diversity, including the origin of what I don't see a way to describe them as anything other than the most diverse and ancient lineage of consistently armored animals, and that's crocodilomorphs. Crocodilomorph, the extended family, right? Episode 2, crocodilomorphs, with one notable exception. All crocodilomorphs are armored. They all have osteoderms. You've got early members like the Edosaurs and the Rawasuchians. You've got stuff that isn't even crocs, like phytosaurs, that are close
Yep.
relatives that are kind of doing a croc thing. Crocs have been armored. That has just always been a defining feature of this lineage, is full body armor.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why you can look through like the list of crocodilian cousins and often go, yeah, that looks crocky because it has a croc back. Because
Yes.
they all have these osteodermed backs for the most part, and they look crocky because of that.
One of the major discussions around croc osteoderms in relation to what it is that they're doing, besides defense and these other features, has revolved around thermoregulation.
Yep.
The idea that these bony bits of armor are helping with heat retention. And the way that that is suggested to work is that all those pits and grooves on the back of those osteoderms contain lots of blood vessels.
Yes.
And those blood vessels are able to constrict or dilate as needed to absorb warmth and spread it to the rest of the body, or dissipate it potentially if that's something that they need. There has been some research that has actually done heat map studies of crocodilians that has found that while they're basking, the osteoderms seem to be warmer than the rest of the skin.
Yeah.
Suggesting that they are absorbing extra heat. And then after a while, when they stop basking, the osteoderms tend to be cooler than the rest of the skin. And they seem to be absorbing heat and dissipating it into the rest of the body.
They heat up more efficiently and then disperse that heat into the vessels in the body. It's like using like a stone or a piece of metal on a fire to heat that up and then do your cooking.
Yes.
It is a more efficient heating element.
Yeah. It's also been observed that the osteoderms are in fact highly vascularized. There's a lot of blood vessels. I'm sure that this has been observed in multiple ways, but the paper that I was reading specified a very interesting way that they were able to observe the vascularization of the osteoderms. Do you know where I'm going with this?
No, I'm not sure.
I assume it's been done through like dissection and stuff, but this paper said they confirmed the vascularization of the osteoderms by looking at an albino alligator.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because they could see the blood vessels through the skin.
Yeah, that's
how cool.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So cool.
Now, this is still debated, right? Exactly what role gator osteoderms play in their heat retention is debated, but it has been suggested that this is an important adaptation for them being semi-aquatic.
Yes.
This is something we talked about this in episode 231 about secondarily aquatic tetrapods. One of the biggest challenges of moving from air to water is that water is real good at sapping heat. Water is way more conductive to heat. So animals that move into the water have all sorts of adaptations to help them stay warm. This has been suggested to potentially be an adaptation for crocs to stay warm in the water.
Yes. Yep.
It has even been pointed out when we look at the fossil record that there are a bunch of terrestrial crocs in the fossil record who have armor, but the pits and grooves on the back of the armor seem to be reduced.
Yes. And they're often less heavily armored. Like,
It's
still there, but it's not as overwhelming as it is when we think of a typical gator or croc.
Yeah. So it's possible that they're reducing the ornamentation, right, the complexity of those osteoderms because they aren't serving that thermoregulation function anymore because they're in the air. And air, it's easy to stay warm.
Or if it is helping with thermoregulation, it's not as critical. You're not needing to heat up as fast or as much because you're not losing that heat every time you go back into the water.
Crocs aren't the only ones. There are some lizards whose osteoderms have been observed to be highly vascularized and might be serving a similar function. Also, armadillos, apparently, inside their osteoderms, have cavities for like fatty tissues that are thought to serve as insulation.
Yep.
that the osteoderm it's like the stuff in your walls, right? That foamy insulation, that it might, now in this case, it's keeping, the heat from escaping the body. This has also been proposed for some other lizards, girdled lizards, I think, where it seems like the osteoderms might be like a blanket trapping heat inside the body.
Very cool.
And then, of course, on the note of thermoregulation, there are also dinosaurs, where this has been suggested, most famously for the big plates of Stegosaurus, which are osteoderms. We'll get to that here in just a little bit, but those are just giant osteoderms.
Which is insane.
Which have been suggested to maybe be absorbing or dissipating heat. Also, some of the big spikes on ankylosaurs have been suggested as potentially having that same function. This has come up. This is another one of those trade-off situations where there's been some research that has suggested that the ability to conduct heat in osteoderms might conflict with their physical strength.
Yeah.
Right, like all that space for vascularization, for blood vessels, the shape of osteoderm that makes it good for thermoregulation might not be as good as body armor.
Yes.
So we've got some potential conflicting functions.
Well, and it's got those things when we talk about like human armor, where it's like you want it to be light enough for you to move, but then you need it to be tough enough to be defensive.
Yes.
We're seeing the same trade-offs here.
You also don't want to overheat inside of it.
Yes,
right? You do want it to breathe a little. Yeah, there's a lot of factors to consider.
If you made perfect impenetrable armor, it's going to be bad at a bunch of other things. And so you have to find that middle ground.
Now, before we move away from crocodilomorphs, as you move into the Mesozoic, you do get the one notable group of this lineage that lost their osteoderms.
Yep.
Those are metriorhynchids, which are the fully marine crocs.
Yes. They are notably smooth-skinned, at least in the fact that they would not have had that bumpy back.
Yeah, we talked about these in episode 168. It's been suggested that the loss of osteoderms might simply be because they needed to be flexible for swimming, right? Because they're swimming like dolphins out there, so they need that flexibility. Others have pointed out that swimming actively generates muscular heat.
Yes.
And I would imagine that, we did talk about this in that episode, there are probably a bunch of other adaptations that they gained for maintaining their body temperature in the water that might have rendered the osteoderms moot. Right? Like that works great when you're semi-aquatic and you're basking. But when you're going way down under the water, you need a whole different set of tools.
I also wonder how much of a difficulty there would be in like surface basking. How much more energy does it take to float on the surface to absorb sunlight? Crocs and gators can just lay on the riverbank and they don't have to float and maintain their position at the surface. But if you're out in the ocean and you can't come onto land, the only way to bask is at the surface. And if there's waves and stuff, that might not be viable.
Well, and I would also imagine that you're going to have a really hard time drying off. Because like a croc can crawl onto land and then dry off. And once it's dry, it can just heat up.
Yes.
But if you're constantly getting splashed by waves, then it's evaporating, which cools you.
Yes.
So it might be not worth it. You might not actually be able to warm up enough to offset that effectively sweating at the top of the surface.
Yeah.
This trade-off seems to also be the case for some other marine reptiles, where you do have some Triassic groups like placodonts and teleosaurs that are armored. They do have osteoderms, but they also seem to be less agile and active swimmers. They seem to be slower bottom dwelling, whereas ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, a lot of the really successful active swimmers, open ocean marine reptiles do not have osteoderms.
Yeah.
On the other hand, osteoderms in modern crocs, like you were describing, form those ridges that are thought to potentially help with hydrodynamics.
Yes.
Moving through the water, which is also suggested for sea turtles. that the ridges on the backs of some sea turtles, which is dermal bone, right? That is osteoderm, at least osteoderm adjacent, has adapted to help them with swimming.
Yes. Yeah, like the famous example of shark scales helping the water to hug the body. It's thought that alligators being so bumpy actually make them move through the water quite efficiently.
Yeah. So osteoderms, in some groups, the loss of osteoderms seems to be related with being active swimmers, but then some other groups seem to have used the osteoderms to help.
Yes.
Right. Turtles being an interesting case where it's like, well, you didn't have a choice. If you're going to
Yep.
be a sea turtle, you got to do something with that shell.
Yep. And I do wonder, and this is a step beyond my understanding of the physics to know how the efficiencies really would break out, but metriorhynchids and a lot of the other marine reptiles that are osteoderm-less, and some of them were like scaleless, like were smooth
Mhm.
skinned, are pursuit predators. They're swimming
Yeah.
actively chasing down food, while modern crocodilians and sea turtles are not pursuit. At least when sea turtles are going for their prey, the prey's not running away because it's a jellyfish.
Right. Yeah. You're not really, you're foraging. You're not
Yeah,
really
like
pursuing.
crabs and jellies are not very high speed prey
Yes.
items.
And crocs are ambush hunters.
They're ambush hunters, and even when they're hunting in the water, it's still ambush, and the efficiency of the water now makes them stealthy, not fast.
Yeah.
It lowers their register in the water to be able to sneak up on prey. It's been shown that the strike speed of many gators is slower than the reaction speed of fish, but the fish still aren't reacting fast enough because they don't feel the gator coming until it's too late.
Yeah. Well, and in the case of sea turtles, I would imagine that that efficiency might not be helping you with swimming fast, but it might be helping you with swimming far.
Exactly, because they are world travelers.
Yeah, they're migrating.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there's a lot of interesting correlates between osteoderms and lifestyle. In fact, there's even been some research that has proposed features of crocodilomorph osteoderms that might link directly to terrestrial or semi-aquatic or aquatic habits.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
there may be the potential for us to look at an osteoderm and go, okay, terrestrial croc or
This
semi-aquatic croc.
seems to be shaped more like a croc that lives in the water versus on land.
There are some other lifestyles that often have these comparisons. A lot of burrowing lizards have lots of armor,
Oh, makes sense.
especially the ones that are head burrowers. So
Yep.
if you're a vertebrate that burrows, there's really two ways to do it. You either dig with your hands or you shove your face into the dirt. And a lot of lizards that are face shovers have armored heads that seem to be there to help protect them from this abrasion. Notably, there are plenty of burrowing lizards that don't have osteoderms. So this isn't a universal.
But if I had to choose,
I would love to be armored if I'm going to be
oh yeah,
underground.
if I'm gonna be digging with my face, please give me some bony armor.
It's also been pointed out that osteoderms seem to have become reduced in certain gliding lizards,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which makes sense. Also of note, there are no known examples of osteoderms in either birds or pterosaurs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be this is a thing that you don't have if you fly, which makes sense, right? That's just extra weight that you probably don't need.
Yeah, it's also going to get in the way of mobility and
Yes.
like moving around.
Also, what do you need to protect yourself from? You're in the
Yeah.
sky. It's also been, back to the question, continuing that idea of like flexibility and activity. Some have suggested that variability in monitor lizards might be related to the fact that they are pursuit predators. They're sprinters and they're swimmers. That activity level might be negatively influencing how much armor they keep around.
Makes sense.
So there's a lot of discussion of the functions and trade-offs of osteoderms depending on the lifestyle of those animals, especially characterized by crocs. Crocs are an excellent case study for that. But there is a second group of extraordinarily famous Mesozoic armored reptiles, and that's dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
Most famously, Thyreophora, which includes stegosaurs, episode 150, and ankylosaurs, episode 69. These are dinosaurs. In the case of stegosaurs, they've got those big plates along the back. Again, now that we're on them specifically, those are osteoderms. Those are just giant plate-sized osteoderms.
Just unreasonable. It's very much, those are the like porcupine quills of the osteoderm world, in that like these porcupine quills are just specialized hair effectively. Like that's just hair that you turned into a needle, and this is skin armor that you turned into projections outside of your body.
Yes. And then ankylosaurs are covered in osteoderm armor. They are famous knobs and plates and spikes all over the body. They are some of the most armored animals that have ever lived. They are preposterously coated.
Eyelid armor, just ridiculous.
Yep. In these animals, there are questions about thermoregulation, right? Like I said, if they're using those plates and spikes to help absorb or dissipate heat, possibly for display, right? You've got these big structures that other animals are looking at, especially, again, the plates of stegosaurs, the big spikes on ankylosaurs. They also are famously using their osteoderms offensively.
Yep.
In the form of tail weapons. The clubs on ankylosaurs and the spikes on stegosaurs, which we did talk about at length in those episodes, which is a very, I think that's the only example that I can think of osteoderms as weapons.
Yeah.
Which is very cool.
And makes so much sense of, if you can make these tough elements in your body, that's like claws are just toughened bits on the end of your digits.
Yep. Teeth. There's precedent for it.
So it makes total sense. It's just kind of crazy that this group really is the only one that's done it.
And then, of course, they are using them defensively, right? Ankylosaurs in particular not only have those spikes, knobs, they've got plates, they've got rings around the neck. But even with ankylosaurs, the anatomy of osteoderms varies. The thickness varies, exactly how much blood vessels there are, which suggests that some were better armor than others. Some of them were more delicate, possibly not being used defensively. Others seem to be very good. Wasn't there a study that came out recently that calculated that you could hit an ankylosaurus with a car and it would be fine?
Yep.
That they just got these massively powerful armor shells.
And like, we often love to emphasize that like animals aren't superheroes. You need to stop showing them like jumping through windows and being unscathed and like taking like gunfire and just powering through an automatic hail of bullets. But no, ankylosaurs could kind of pull off the Superman, I'm just going to stand in front of this truck.
Just the Ben Grimm on the bridge.
Yeah. Yep. Like they kind of, could with a sedan at least.
This has brought us back to defense, but the question of who is it that ankylosaurs are defending against has potentially a different answer than what we normally think of with osteoderms, because ankylosaurs seem to be perfectly capable of defending themselves against tyrannosaurs and stuff, but also against each other.
Yes.
There was recent research that looked at the relatively new species Zool, the ankylosaur, that found damage on the osteoderms around the hip that seem to be consistent in both where they are and the shape of the damage with having gotten hit by the club of another ankylosaur.
Yeah.
So in this case, it seems that the armor might be not just defending against predators, but defending against rivals and combat. This has also been suggested for some other living animals. In some geckos that have osteoderms, they are mostly on the head, which might be related to their fights that males have, that they like bite each other on the head. Some girdled lizards males develop osteoderms around sexual maturity, which seems to be lining up with the idea that they are fighting each other and that this
Mhm.
is armor. Now it's more like the horns and thick heads of like goats and bison and stuff, where this is really
Yeah.
meant to be clashing with others of your community.
There was also a study, we talked about it in the news, but I don't remember how far back, that suggested this for crocodilians as well, that when you look at the development of their osteoderms, if I remember right, it doesn't actually become robust armor until they're mature. And
Mm-hmm.
so, which is counterintuitive when that's not when they're being preyed upon. Like
Yes.
once you're a mature croc, you are the predator. No one's usually eating you unless you're a caiman and worried about jaguars.
Yes. It's like a great white shark being armored. Like why?
Yes,
Why would
exactly.
you what do you need armor
Like
for?
the time you need it is when you're younger, and that's not when it seems to be doing its most defensiveness. And yeah, it's because crocodilians are extremely aggressive fighters with each other. So it
Mm-hmm.
seems like that might be why this lineage initially developed their armor, was because of fighting with each other, not just for defense from predators.
Now, there are other dinosaurs that have osteoderms. For example, in the skulls of horned dinosaurs and dome
Hmm.
headed
Hmm.
dinosaurs, which we've talked about before. Among theropods, Ceratosaurus has osteoderms in the skull.
Yeah.
And these seem to, the skull osteoderms seem to be very much display, or like in pachycephalosaurs and horned dinosaurs, maybe they're helping protect the head while they're wrestling with each other. The other major group of dinosaurs that has body armor of osteoderms are sauropods,
Yeah.
specifically titanosaurs. These are the long neck, long tail dinosaurs, sauropods. Titanosaurs are one specific group that happens to include the biggest land animals of all time. In sauropods, the osteoderms aren't a like coat of armor the way they are in ankylosaurs. They tend to be scattered throughout and not continuous. These include, according to this paper that I read, the largest known osteoderm ever found.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
This was, I think this paper was 2011, so it's possible that this is no longer true. But this was an osteoderm that was associated with the bones of an adult Repetisaurus, which is a sauropod from the late Cretaceous of Madagascar. The osteoderm itself is sort of squash shaped, like
Okay. Okay.
or like a pear shape, kind of.
Hmm.
It measures 57 centimeters, so almost 2 feet, by 27 centimeters, so almost 1 foot, by 19 centimeters, so two-thirds of a foot. 22 inches by 11 inches by 7 inches. The researchers estimate the full volume of the osteoderm at about 9.5 liters, which for Americans is 2.5 gallons.
Wow.
This thing is huge. It's
Yeah.
half a meter long, bulky. It's big.
Yeah. Wow.
It is according to this paper, as of that paper, the largest osteoderm by volume.
Mm-hmm.
Is because
Mm-hmm.
obviously you got stuff like spikes in ankylosaurs and plates in stegosaurs, which can be a meter long, but they tend to
Yes.
be narrow. This is the bulkiest known osteoderm. Is just this. I'm trying to think of a comparison for it. I guess a squash, actually.
I mean, yeah, it really
It is
like the
kind
shape
of.
is kind of squashy, but it's just this small boulder that's in their
Yeah.
skin. Wow.
Now, they've been the source of another discussion about what exactly are they doing with these, because there has been some research that has suggested that these osteoderms could be protective,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but them being kind of scattered throughout the skin kind of does seem to defy that a little bit, right? You,
Yeah,
you
they're
don't
not
have a.
making a shield.
Yeah. It's also been pointed out that in some cases, the osteoderms seem to be more solid as in juveniles, but they hollow out in adults,
Interesting.
which would make sense for protection for the juveniles, right? Like we were just talking
Yes.
about with crocs that we don't see, is that it might be that these are armor and protection in juveniles, but then they're not in adults because they're becoming hollow and brittle.
Yeah. And why would you need armored protection as an adult titanosaur?
You're an adult titanosaur. No, once
Like,
again, this is like being an armored blue whale.
yeah.
Why?
Well, it's like as cool as World War Hulk was, like Planet Hulk
Right,
was.
but why are you
Why does
wearing
Hulk
armor?
need gladiator armor?
You're the Hulk.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's been other suggestions, right? Obviously display, obviously thermoregulation could be there, although they're not prominent. They don't seem to be prominent external features like spikes and stuff. So one of the big potential functions that has been discussed for sauropod osteoderms is mineral storage.
Yeah.
That this is just a little storehouse of calcium or other minerals that they could then use when they need it. This has been suggested and studied in crocs.
Yep.
There has been research. For example, there was one study that looked at alligators, osteoderms, x-rayed and did like histological samples and found that the osteoderms are denser in early pregnancy females. And then later in their pregnancy, when the eggs have mineralized, and then after, while they're nesting, the osteoderms are not as dense anymore.
Yeah.
Which seems to suggest that they are building up calcium in the osteoderms and then pulling it out when they need it to help build the eggs.
Which is just such a cool concept biologically for animals to do.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before with like medullary bone in birds that build up bony deposits.
Yeah, this came up in episode 210 that like our bones are also like closets where we keep like important stuff in case we need it.
Yes. But like having literal little storehouses, little nuggets, little batteries of mineral storage in the form of these osteoderms is so cool. Like I want things to make it when you next time you make your sci-fi creature that lives out in the desert, give it big bony deposits that it stores up minerals because of the sparse food. Like this is so cool.
There's also been discussion of osteoderms serving not. This is a case of them like I'm holding on to this and then I can donate it to where it's needed. There's also suggestions of the function of osteoderms being sinks for things.
Yeah.
Like lactate or carbonate when they build up. Lactic acid builds up in our bodies when we do a lot of activity. There is some evidence that extra bony material might be absorbing some of that harmful buildup. This has been suggested for things like certain crocodilians, but also turtles, for having all of that bone might be what lets them be active for a little more, or most often this is suggested for how they stay underwater for so long.
Yep.
The body starts building up chemicals to say, hey, oxygen, please. And if these animals have bony structures that can just sort of siphon away those chemicals a little bit, it gives them an extra buffer against those negative effects.
Well, and it means they don't have to process all of these toxins at once. Your filter system, your liver and your kidneys and whatnot can only filter so much so quickly. And that's how you get a toxic overdose is your body goes, I cannot deal with this as fast as it's coming in. When it's micro doses, your body goes, yeah, okay, no, it's within the limits. I can handle this.
Yes.
And so if you can sink this away, then slowly leach it back out, you can process it when you're outside of the critical situation.
So osteoderms in a lot of reptiles seem to also be functioning as mineral deposit areas, either for absorbing them or storing them. It's very, very cool.
Oh, man, it's such a sci-fi thing and I love it.
And then we move into the Cenozoic, where our major update to the evolutionary history of osteoderms is that mammals have them now.
Yep.
There is at least one extinct mammal. There's something from the Messel pit that is, I don't know if it's a marsupial or something. It's some weird ancient, or maybe it's like a Eulypa like a hedgehog type thing that seems to maybe have osteoderms.
Okay.
But Mostly when we're talking about ancient mammals with osteoderms, we're talking about the armadillo lineage, right?
Yep.
Xenarthra is a group of mammals we've talked about a whole bunch. They've got two major groups. On the one hand, you've got cingulates, which includes armadillos, the extinct glyptodonts, and pampathirs, all of whom are heavily armored.
Yes.
Like armadillos, these are some of the most armored animals there ever have been. They tend to have full carapaces on their backs, heads, backs, tails. They tend to have different shapes of osteoderms for different parts of the body, and they see the armor seems to be present in even the earliest known members of this lineage.
Yeah.
Which that this has always been a thing of this lineage. This got started very early on. The other major group within Xenarthra are pelosans, which is anteaters and sloths. And they mostly don't have osteoderms. Anteaters don't have any. Living sloths, tree sloths, do not have osteoderms, but there are ground sloths in the fossil record with osteoderms in the skin. This is only present in a handful of ground sloth species, and it only seems to be present in later members. It's like later in their evolutionary history. These are also quite different from the osteoderms we see in the other xenarthrans. Sloth osteoderms have a much simpler structure. They're more variable in their size and shape. They aren't articulated. They're scattered throughout the skin. And they also don't, apparently, there isn't clear evidence of any sort of like keratin covering.
Mm-hmm.
They appear to have just been in the skin.
Yes.
They don't seem to have emerged out of the skin like we see, with that like scale coating that we see in like armadillos and crocs and stuff.
Yeah.
This has led researchers to suggest that sloths might be another independent origin of osteoderms.
Which would make a lot of sense.
This might not be just a ancestral xenarthran thing. It seems that both lineages developed osteoderms independently, probably from a very similar foundation. And this also raises the question of what sloths were doing with these osteoderms. Mm-hmm. And it might have been similar mineral deposit stuff as we see in crocs and potentially those sauropods.
Sloth osteoderms were one of the craziest first things I ever learned about ground sloths. Because they were already this very unusual group, and then that was one of the first things I remember learning of like adult paleofacts that made me go, wait, what?
Yep, same. Preposterous.
I got shown some, and they just look like these lumpy biscuits of bone. Mm-hmm. Like these just kind of blobs of bone. They're not nice and structured like the puzzle piece osteoderms and crocodilians, or geometric like the tile ones of armadillos that make these nice hexagonal patterns. It's just like these landmines of bone just scattered throughout the hide of ground sloths, and that's bizarre.
Yeah, so they don't seem like they would have been particularly good armor.
No.
Unless you got bit right in just the right place. So it might have been calcium storage or something like that.
Yeah. I guess it could be just like, maybe it could have acted as a support to like a tougher hide or something. Like if you had these connection points, like there were like lots of ligaments and things connecting things. But yeah, they don't seem like a coat of armor to any degree.
And then finally, as I alluded to way earlier, we have the other group of mammals that have osteoderms. This was discovered like a couple years ago. This is very recent research that there are mice who have osteoderms.
Yep.
These are rodents. They are in the mouse family, Muridae. They belong to a subfamily called Diomyinae, which includes 4 types of mouse: spiny mice, brush-furred mice, link rats, and Rudd's mice, all of which have armored tails.
Yeah!
The tails have these rings of osteoderms around them, kind of like an armadillo.
Mm-hmm.
They are the only other living mammals known with osteoderms besides armadillos. These are all still around today. Every genus in this subfamily has these osteoderms.
It's so random and so cool.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite examples because this one really is out of nowhere. Just
Mhm.
a random subfamily of mice has osteoderms, and it really demonstrates that convergent variability of these.
Yes.
As for what they're doing with these, all of these mice are known to perform a defensive strategy known as skin shedding or tail sheathing, which was described in the paper I read as a tearaway defense.
Yep.
Where they lose the skin of their tail. It's
Yeah.
sort of when we think about lizards that will drop their tail as either a distraction or like the predator grabs you by the tail and then you drop it and you run and hopefully you're
Mhm.
able to get away. It's that, but you're only losing part of the tail. You're only losing the outer part.
Yeah. You're keeping all the bones. You can't regrow those like those darn lizards can.
Yeah. Which we're just going to have to move on quickly from that because did that come up in like, I think that came up in the Tails episode, maybe.
Yeah,
Episode
that I think it
151.
was Tails where we made this horrifying discovery of tail sheathing.
Because you use the phrase degloving, which is
Yep.
the worst phrase.
Yep. And like as soon as you learn that this is the behavior that they have, the osteoderms suddenly do make sense that it's like, oh, it is this it's a layer for the predator to be able to grab onto but keep them from grabbing any further into the tail.
Yes.
And so when they pull, all they get is the armored surface and then you just slip right out of your tail and run away.
Yeah, and that does seem to be the case. That it seems to be so that when you bite, you don't bite through the tail.
Mm-hmm.
You bite onto the tail and then they're able to lose it. Interestingly, fish-scaled geckos do the same thing and also have osteoderms in the tail.
So crazy.
So not only does that support this interpretation, but the fact that this extremely specific defensive strategy evolved at least twice.
Yeah, extremely specific, disturbing, unpleasant strategy.
I have to imagine this is very much like when we talk about animals that one of their defense strategies is to like pee because and it works, but it's very funny to be like, well, yeah, I would be like, no, don't do this. I don't know that the most discouraging thing about this is that it would gross me out. That I would be like, oh, I'm going to eat this lizard. And I grab it, and then the skin of its tail comes off like a sock. I'm not hungry anymore. I don't need to eat.
Well, I'm a vegetarian now, so I'm all good.
Gross.
Just to feel the bones slide out from beneath your grip. It's like the scene in Terminator Judgment Day when he peels the skin off of his robot hand to show them and explain that he's a robot. But if you were just to like try to grab someone and you grab them by the wrist, I gotcha, and they just slide their arm out of the skin glove that you are now holding.
This has brought us back around to the subject of defenses and to the final little category that I want to talk about, which is specifically osteoderms as tail defense.
Yeah.
Which brings me to one more example of an unexpected discovery of osteoderms in a group of animals where they were not expected. This is a study from 2023, which reported the first ever case of osteoderms in snakes.
Yeah.
Snakes, with how much osteoderms are abundant in lizards, it is very notable that snakes are armorless.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it has been, right, the obvious answer is to be like, oh, well, they need to be super flexible and they need to be all snaky. But glass lizards are fully armored.
Yep.
And they seem to do snakiness pretty okay. So exactly why snakes don't have osteoderms is a little bit less obvious.
Because, like, I can understand that argument for a bunch of snakes, but there's a whole bunch of snakes that also aren't, like, super tie themselves in knots.
Yeah. Well, and snakes are so diverse. There's like
Yes, exactly.
4,000 species of them. You'd think that some of them would have osteoderms. Turns out some of them do. 2023 study found 4 species of sand boas that have small osteoderms on the tail and then like the back part of the body, the
Yeah.
posterior. These osteoderms sit just below the scales where you would expect them, alongside extra large and specialized vertebrae. So this is only part of a specialization of this tail. This is thought to be defensive to protect the tail. These sand boas use their tails to distract predators. They're one of these animals that have a tail that looks like their head, so that like
Yes.
hopefully you get bit on the tail and not the face. There is similar behavior in some lizards that do the same thing, like skinks and anguids, which have armored tails as well. So this might be kind of similar to those gross mice, where like this part of the body is what is going to be attacked. So let's reinforce this specific part of the body. Sand boas also go into rodent burrows to eat rodent babies, and it has been suggested that having armor on your tail might be useful for when the parent shows back up.
That makes a lot of sense. When you're between them and your babies.
Yes, that's what they're going to encounter first. So put a little extra armor on the tail so that you have time to get away. These are not the only ones that use their tails this way. Girdled lizards, some species are known to like hide in crevices, and they'll use their tail to seal off the crevice. They've got those armored tails. Some skinks back into a burrow and block the entrance with their head osteoderms, right? The shield on their head. And some armadillos do this. Fairy armadillos, I saw specifically mentioned, that will block the entrance to a burrow with their butt.
Yes.
They stick their butt, and it's armored because they've got that armor on there. So defense, coming all the way back around to the topic of predator defense, but specific parts of the body being used to defend in specific ways is a really interesting specialized use of osteoderms, and is the case for 2 groups that otherwise do not have any osteoderms. 2 rodents and snakes, which is like, if those groups don't have osteoderms, there's got to be a reason for it. Those are extremely successful groups. And so far, the one reason that seems to have driven both groups to have osteoderms is defending their tails.
Yes, which is so fascinating. Well, and it's so cool that we just went through the variety of functions that osteoderms can have, but even when talking about them being defensive armor, it can be for different defending against different threats, defending against predators, defending against rivals, defending against competition,
right? Defending against the environment.
But then it can also be defending in very different uses and techniques. Like you have the skink or armadillo or crocodilians that are just generally armored. Like I am mostly covered. Like armadillos have a soft underbelly, but that's why they're very low to the ground. So everything that's exposed to the environment is covered in armor. But you can just have an armored section, a way to use your armor. The turtles having armored limbs that fill in where the shell is missing. So it's cool that even within the use of armor, they are quite diverse in how they serve that purpose.
Yeah. Osteoderms are a fascinating. This is one of those, we've done a bunch of episodes like this where we're talking about a type of feature. Well, this came up with like tusks, right? Yep. Episode 107, where it's like, we all kind of know what we're talking about when we say tusks, but really we're talking about a bunch of different features.
Yes.
And so the question with a feature like osteoderms, where it's like, well, what's the function of osteoderms? It's like, name some. You know, they're bones, right? They've got this incredible diversity of function, just like we see in scales and fur and horns. Osteoderms are not one feature. They are many, many features in a category. And the way it's fascinating to explore how different groups of life in different circumstances have come to this similar solution for wildly different reasons.
Yeah, it's very cool. And the fact that it also can show up in unsuspecting groups
Mm-hmm.
makes me wonder of just like, this is one of those features. And this goes for many pieces of anatomy, but this one especially, man, what kind of weird osteoderms are going to show up in Earth's history of like,
Yeah. Or even today.
yes,
Like those
absolutely.
rodents and snakes are like this decade discoveries.
Yep.
And also the monitor lizards was one that was just a few
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago.
Discovering that Komodo dragons have a armored throat
Yeah.
was very recent.
So like keep looking, and because
Mhm.
this is the other thing with osteoderms is that you'd think it'd be easy to spot, but you have to really get in the skin to figure it out.
Yes.
And unless you have a reason to do that, you may never notice this. So like, are there whales with osteoderms out there
Mhm.
that just waiting for us to go find them, or salamanders?
Well, and it's like the example you've used before of when you dissected the python and lost one of the pelvic spurs because they're
Yep.
so tiny. If you were trying to find osteoderms strictly via dissection, some of them are within scales. Like they are
Yes.
such tiny pieces of bone that really the only way to do it reliably often is with CAT scans, with
Yeah, we'll use x-rays.
detailed x-rays.
Yeah. And even then, there are so many things in the skin
Yep.
that you'd think that a chunk of bone would be obvious, but there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of minerals, there's a lot of collagen bundles and things, especially if the osteoderms themselves are tiny, like
Yep.
in monitor lizards. You might not even recognize what that is right away.
Yeah. So you need to kind of know what you're looking for. And that means that things that we can't do that with, like whales,
Mm-hmm.
like we don't have a portable oceanic x-ray system to be able to x-ray a whale while it's swimming around.
You'd have to put it through the scanner 100 pieces,
Yes.
one at a time.
Scanned by 100 cuts. And and like so like there's a whole bunch of animals out there that we've also just not gone looking for. Like,
Yeah.
is there a bat that has osteoderms that we've just not looked for because we've gone, of course bats don't have osteoderms. Why would we even look for them there?
Actually, right before we sat down to record, I was struck because there's so much that I didn't get into in this because this is so variable. But right before we recorded, I found myself struck with the question of whether or not tuataras have osteoderms.
Yeah.
Because I was going to be like, oh yeah, all major groups of reptiles have osteoderms. Wait. And a quick literature search found me that no, modern tuataras do not. There is one fossil rhynchocephalian that seems to have had osteoderms, but that lineage seems to not have osteoderm.
Huh.
Which is very interesting because that is a very diverse, very lizard-like group of animals.
Yeah.
And they seem to have not done osteoderms almost entirely, whereas lizards have become the most at osteoderms.
Mm-hmm. And stuff like that. This is another one of those features that we mentioned early on. There might be a underlying genetic system within tetrapods that lends us toward the ability to convergently evolve the development of bone in the skin.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means that a lineage might lose that you had a mutation that broke that genetic system. So you don't make osteoderms. So like, is that why birds don't have osteoderms? Or is it because it's not good for flying? And that's hard to know. So you can get this seemingly random pattern of like, why has this group just not done it? And this one's done it a whole bunch.
Yep.
It might have been one genetic quirk.
If you had asked me 5 years ago why snakes don't have osteoderms, I would have said, yeah, maybe they had like some genetic quirk that just makes them not able to grow them, which apparently is not true because some of them have osteoderms. The solution, obviously, is we have to go x-ray every snake.
Yes. X-ray all animals.
I was so happy that there is a snake example because this is such a Crocs heavy episode.
Yep.
I was delighted. I was like, yes, I get to talk about snakes.
It's Very cool.
Well, before we turn off the mics, there's one more thing to do, and that is our patron questions. One of the benefits that our patrons can receive by supporting us on Patreon is the ability to submit questions that we will answer here on the podcast. We got a couple of questions today that are fitting, I think, as follow-ups for today's topic. Will, what's our first one?
Our first question is from Caden. How math heavy are the fields like paleontology and anthropology? As someone wanting to get into the field, I will admit the idea of doing math is a huge negative.
Understandable. This episode I thought would be a fun one to answer this question because we talked a whole lot in this episode about biomechanical studies,
Yes.
right? Looking at like thermal imaging or strain resistance in these structures, and those are very math heavy approaches. There's a lot of statistical analyses when we're trying to identify relationships and stuff. So there are techniques commonly used in paleontology and anthropology that are pure math.
Yes.
But there are also plenty of things that aren't pure math. Like when I, in my research, was just sitting around identifying what osteoderms belong to who, I didn't have to do any math. I just had to compare bones and pictures and stuff.
Yes. And even for a lot of those things where if you want to like do a comparative analysis for a family group and whatnot, you're going to need to do statistical because modern paleontology is statistics-based analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But there are programs that do that math heavily for you.
There are programs and there are co-authors.
Yes.
So that's there is a paleontologist that I considered working with at one point, and I ended up not. But he has basically built his paleontology career as being the statistics guy.
Yes.
And so he would be, and I think this is diversified since then, but when I was looking into it, this guy's name would show up on papers about hundreds of different things because he was the person people would go to be like, hey, I want to do a statistical analysis. Can you help me with that?
Yeah.
So the short answer is you can make a career in paleontology or anthropology with minimal math. You can avoid math if that's not what you want to do.
To put it even more bluntly, we have many paleontologist friends who do not like math.
Yes.
We personally know many people who have been successful members of the paleo community who are not fans of doing math.
Yes.
So you can do it.
I managed to publish multiple research papers without ever having to do math.
Yep. So it is not a particularly math heavy field. It is going to be adjacent to math a lot of the time because the modern version of it is statistical analysis. That's how we get around personal biases in how we analyze stuff, is converting it to numbers. So that way we're not having to go, well, to me, it looks more like this group than this group. If we can numberify it, that gets rid of that bias.
Some of the math also isn't very mathy.
No.
Like you were like the statistics stuff, a lot of it is just you plug it into a program and the program spits out data for you.
Like if you understand that math, you can probably dive deeper into that than I would be able to. But my thesis, I used statistical analysis on the shapes of the bones I was looking at, and I did not know what equations were being run, but I was able to interpret it enough to still describe the results.
And once again, co-authors.
Yep. Teamwork makes the math easy. Our next question is from Alice. Could invertebrates have evolved an internal skeleton? I know squid have an internal shell, but it seems to be just one piece. Is there some limitation to how their hard parts are formed? Similarly, could vertebrates have gone fully external? Turtles or armored fish seem close. Is it easier to form or maintain bone internally?
Great question. Very fitting for this particular episode.
Yes.
The short answer is the line between an exoskeleton and an endoskeleton is much blurrier than we often think of it being.
Yes.
Like we've been discussing throughout this episode, tons of vertebrates have these dermal bones that are effectively an exoskeleton. You know, they're covered by often like keratin scales, but insect exoskeletons are covered in cuticle,
Yes.
which is very similar sort of mineralized coating. So there aren't any examples that I know of invertebrates going with a fully internal skeleton or vertebrates going fully external, which might be less about feasibility and more about just how much of a change that would be.
Yes.
You'd have to lose your entire skeleton, which at that point evolve on another planet. Like that's one of those like at that well it's like when you take your car to the mechanic and they're like, yeah, we could fix this, but it would be cheaper and easier for you to just get a new car.
That's what the comparison I was thinking of is like, you can technically put any engine you want into any car. But if you want to put an 8-cylinder engine into a car built for only 4, you're going to have to basically replace the entire interior and maybe some of the frame of that car
Yes.
so that it can fit this incompatible engine. It'd be the same thing that so many changes and adaptations would have to happen for a internal skeleton vertebrate to move that skeletal structure to the outside, that it definitely, there's nothing like impossible about that, but it's so many steps that you're a different kind of animal now.
Yeah. That said, there are plenty of invertebrates with internal skeletons. Like in Alice's example, squid and cuttlefish have that internal, which is exoskeleton that has moved in.
Yes.
Right, that it has become an internal piece, whereas in vertebrates, and I think turtles and armored fish are two of probably the closest. I guess if you had like an armored cartilaginous fish,
yes,
right, like with the armor of a placoderm but the skeleton of a shark, where you've lost all the bony bits of the internal skeleton and expanded on the bony bits of the integument, now you have effectively become an animal with an exoskeleton and no endoskeleton.
And if you wanted to like fully shift to only relying on that exoskeleton as your main support, you'd have to develop a whole new set of musculature to now move the body just via this external armor. And that, once again, not impossible, but that is a lot of adaptation that needs to happen for that to be a thing. So it feels very much like, if you were a person around during the Carboniferous and they're like, so do you ever think one of these, slimy boys will fly? Be like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, they don't even have as many limbs as the dragonflies flying around. Where are those wings going to go? And it's not that that's an impossible thing, but to imagine all the crazy adaptations that have to happen to turn forelimbs into wings, it'd be something like that. It's just so much would need to happen that there's no feasible way to predict how it would happen.
Yeah. Fascinating thought. And I think that this question really does, my favorite part of it is that it exposes that blurry line. That endoskeleton and exoskeleton are really just categories we came up with. Although I will say, having now said it, the idea of a armored cartilaginous fish as an exoskeleton vertebrate is something I will be tucking away for a potential spooky discussion.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That's a cool idea. I really like that.
Yep. Well, and I feel like if insects or other arthropods were to go internal skeleton, that it would be kind of like what happened with the cuttlefish and squid, where it would just be the exoskeleton folding in more to the body until you've got more soft tissue on the outside and exoskeleton on the inside, but it's still the same structure, just turned inward.
For more insights on this, episode 210 about bones goes into all of the functions of bones that you'd have to replace and the origin of bones. This is really, I think, at its core, this comes down to you stick with what you got.
Yes.
Thank you, Caden and Alice, for those questions and for your support on Patreon. Listeners, there's going to be a blog post associated with this episode on our website where I'm going to put a whole bunch of cool pictures of osteoderms. It's going to be great. I'm going to get those pictures of like the caiman that's been split Well, so that you could see the osteoderms and armadillos and stuff. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be so cool.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, we made me think of the crocodile skin armor that's been found
Oh yeah.
that people have
Ooh,
made. Yeah.
cool.
It's good
Thank
stuff.
you to all of our requesters. We greatly appreciate your suggestions. Listeners, if you would like to request a topic, go to the request form on our website. You can find that link in the episode description. Thanks, as always, to our patrons for their incredible support. Listeners, if you would like to be a patron, you can go to our Patreon and find the link in the episode description. And an extra special thanks, as always, to our top tier patrons, Jeff Ellington, Danielle Loves Bugs, and Sarah May. This episode is coming out in late February, which means keep your eyes out for Bricks with Basque, which has starting back up for the year. Keep your ears out for the final episodes of Poke E, where we get just so weird. And keep your ears out for announcements about our museum meetup, which we are planning to do our first one of the year in April. We're going to be at ETS UConn in Johnson City. So hopefully we remember to say that at the beginning of this episode. And we release episodes every fortnight. So there will be more episodes that'll be happening.
Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.